Welcome to creating an ARC-style harvestable plant in Unreal Engine 4.10.2. My name is Keith. I'm also known as Darkholder for Mindless Pursuits, and I'll be walking you through this. So why this tutorial? Well, really it comes down to I love survival games, and so do a lot of other people. So I thought a series of one-off videos that show how to implement different concepts you'll find in survival games would be interesting. I wanted to demonstrate again how useful it is to understand the responsibility principle, the single responsibility principle for keeping objects in control of their own actions instead of spreading their actions out among a bunch of different actors or players, and because it's fun. So the topics we're going to cover in this video: we need a destructible mesh for our plant, and so we're going to very briefly cover that. Our destructible mesh is not complex, so it's probably going to take us like 60 to 90 seconds. That'll be it, but you'll get to see it. And then a future one will probably talk more about destructible meshes. We're going to create a plant class that allows harvesting of random numbers of goodies. In this case, it's going to be a generic berry. And you're going to see me create something called an inventory item, but it's not a full inventory system. It's just an example of how you would use a generic type of goodie and pass it into an inventory system. And then we're going to talk about the interaction between the plant class and the player character. So the player character initiates an action. You're going to see that all the heavy lifting happens with the plant class. About me: software developer of over 35 years of experience with multiple languages. My primary languages are C# and C++. I do a lot of web development as well. I might cover a web game if I can figure out how to do that with Unreal at some point. I am a licensed teacher who has taught kindergarten through 8th grade. I love video games. I've been playing since the original Pong. I've owned a majority of consoles. I'm more a PC gamer at heart, but I have everything. And I believe in sharing the learning process. If you've seen any of my other videos, if you've seen my vlogs, I don't claim Unreal Engine expertise. I am learning as I go, just like anybody else. So what I show you is, what I know at this point in time. I'll answer your questions as best I can. What you see in this video is a launching point. It may not be the best approach for your game. It may not be the best approach if you were an Unreal Engine expert who's been using it, for AAA games or something. But it's the one that I think is best for demonstration at the moment, so that's why I do it. So let's dive in. We're going to start with a quick look at ARC and the inspiration for it, and then I'm going to show you what we're going to build, and then we'll actually dive into building it. Okay, so this is ARC, for those who haven't seen it before. And very simply put, when you're building all your stuff, you're collecting resources and so on, you're going to go around and you're going to harvest stuff from plants, kind of like this. And once the plant runs out, it just falls apart. And I suspect each plant has a randomly generated number of goodies that go along with it, because some die faster than others. But they all follow the same basic method of working, so that's what we're going to try and replicate. So here is what we're going to create. It's a very simple first-person perspective look, which is how most survival games are. I'm using a set of hands created by a third party. You'll find the link to them below. And we're not going to cover how the rigging and all that works. They just had a very good animation. I'll demonstrate it for you. If I right click, that's actually for pushing a door, but it actually works really well for harvesting as well. How many as well is going to get into one statement? We're going to set up a couple different plants. You'll see here, and we'll set up overlapping plants. And what you're going to see is our plants have a remaining berries count, so we can follow that and just see. When we get close enough to see if they're harvestable or not, it'll say harvestable, non-harvestable if we move away, just so you can see the difference. So when I'm doing this, it really is doing the action, but there's nothing else occurring. When I get into harvestable, I click it, you'll see it took so many berries. I told you our player now has 4 berries, for instance. Our player has 6, and the plant only has 2 left. And when we take the last of them, the plant falls apart and then vanishes. And here, when we have multiple plants, if we get in there, we can see Harvestable turns up for both of them. If we click, we already got all the berries off one, and now we get all the berries off the other. But it took off 2 plants at once. So that's it. That's what you're going to see. It's not terribly spectacular, but it's useful if you're creating a survival game. So here we are. This is our starting place here. As you can see, I've already got a bunch of folders in here. What I've done is I am using the Iron Belly arms, animated arms, and as we saw before in our quick little preview, this is what they look like. And there is a push door animation that will work perfectly well for us in harvesting. So that's what we're going to go with. We imported our low poly foliage in. This is the low poly jungle set environment from the marketplace. Just like the Iron Belly animated arms are in the marketplace. I'll have links for both of those below for anyone who wants to try and replicate this. And the other elements here are just the folders that are in the typical first-person blueprint project for 10.4.2 or 4.10.2. Okay, so the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to create our destructible mesh for our foliage. So let's go in here and let's find a ground plant. And 8 could be nice. Let's go with 5 though, it's even smaller. So we will right click on that. And then let's create a destructible mesh. Pull that up there. And what you'll see is we start off with a cell site count of 25. Now that's how many pieces it's going to break into. So if we were to fracture this right now and show it exploding out, we would have 25 different pieces. Well, we definitely don't need that many for what we're going to do. So we're going to lower this down. We're going to take it way down to 5. And we will fracture the mess again. And we explode it out and we've just got 5 pieces. Again, that'll be good enough for what we're trying to do. We don't actually have to change anything else at the moment. Now you can look at the different settings if you want. It's got the materials and everything up in here. But we're not going to change anything, so it's not really going to matter. And there's thumbnail info and streaming distance multiplier. All this good stuff. But again, we aren't really doing anything with it. So not going to worry about that right now. We will save this. Now we've saved it. It's right there for us to use. And let's start creating our plant. So we'll go back to content. And again, depending upon your project, you won't have all these folders, but that's just the way this project is set up. We're going to create a new blueprint class. And it's just going to be of type actor. And this is going to be our harvestable plant. And then within our harvestable plant, we have our nice little view here. Now we have to add some things to our basic actor here. So we are going to want to add a destructible mesh. Oops. So we can add a destructible. We are going to want to add a sphere collision. So we can go down here to our collisions and find a sphere collision. And because we're going to want to be able to just view, for the sake of this demonstration, how many berries or goodies are left on each plant, we will go ahead and we will add a text render component that will display up above the plant. So with this, we can go ahead and let's start by configuring our destructible mesh. Now you're going to find that there's something weird with my system, which is at the moment my system refuses to show destructible meshes in the viewport. I don't know why. It'll show perfectly fine when we drag it out into the scene, or into the map, but it doesn't want to show here at all, no matter what I do. Don't know why that is. If I show you really quick, I can add a normal static mesh. If I add the base static mesh that we base this off of, which was ground plant 5, it shows up just fine. So I'm going to put that in there just for a second so we can size our sphere to it. Let's go ahead and select our sphere, and we will size our sphere up because we want our sphere to basically encompass the whole of the plant. So if we maneuver around here, that's pretty good. It's not going to be perfect, but it's going to be a pretty good size. And we'll leave it there for just a second longer, and we will show our text render. We're going to change a couple things about that. So the first thing we're going to do is we're going to alter the world size. We're going to drop it down quite a bit. We're going to make it 14 in size, so it's a little easier to read when we're close to the plant. And then we are going to horizontally align it in the center. And then we'll move it up above the plant. So that should be plenty. And I think that's all we will do for that one. We can always leave our static mesh there for the sake of looking at, and we won't actually need it in the game. So we can turn off rendering except when we need it. So we'll turn that off. We have all that set. Let's look at our sphere here, because our sphere is going to help define our collision. Or not help define, but it is going to be our collision. So if we look at that, we've got our sphere already sized. We are going to leave most everything the same, except that we are going to change our overlap type to be overlap only the pawn. So we only want the player pawn. And we'll be adding stuff down here later, but not quite yet. We don't have to change our text render because we already did that. So if we go to our Destructible, we're going to make a few changes here just to support how it will fall apart when we are done. So we come over here, we need to change our collision, and we're going to do something really funky here. So our collision preset, we're actually going to make a custom collision. We're going to leave our query and physics intact. We're going to change our object type to a physics body. And the reason why I do that, if you don't, the pieces explode outward, whereas if you change it to a physics body, they just fall down. Ordinarily, when I create a destructible object, I can leave it as destructible, like if I do a door or something, and it still collapses. But for some reason with the plants, it wants to blow it outward. I don't know why. So we have to change our ignore, overlap, and block settings here. We're not going to pay any attention to the camera or such, so those will both be set to ignore. We do have to block world static, because if we don't, we will fall through our floor or our ground or whatever terrain is underneath us. We can ignore the world dynamic at the moment. We want to overlap our pawn so we can just walk through it. We want to ignore being an actual physics body. We want to ignore a vehicle, and we're going to block as a destructible. And then we will leave that as ECB owner. We can turn both of these off because we won't need them. And then we can compile, and that is set. And if we want to look at this really quick, just drag it out here so you know I'm not kidding about the destructible mesh showing up. There you go. So the destructible mesh shows up. If we want to resize this, go down here, and we'll drag that up a bit. And if we play, it's all there. As you can see, we can walk through it. There are no issues. And it's nice and firmly in the ground, which is another reason why you change it from physics object, because if it had that collision, then it actually wants to float above the ground instead of being embedded in it. And of course, we do this and nothing happens because we don't have an overlap at the moment. So we'll stop that again, and we're going to delete this plant right back out. just because it doesn't have any functionality yet. So we'll go back in here and we'll go to our event graph, and we're going to define some properties for our wonderful plant. So we need to figure out what it's going to have in it. I'm going to close these components for the moment. And we're going to add some variables. So the first thing we want to know is our plant harvestable? And there are a couple of conditions where it might not be. One is if we aren't close enough to it. Second is if it doesn't have any materials left, so we may have taken the last of what it has to harvest and it has fallen apart, but it hasn't yet vanished from the screen. Well, we don't want people to be able to continue acting upon it, so we'll change it from being harvestable at that point. We're going to want to know what the maximum number of, in our case, berries is that it can carry. We could say inventory items and have it randomly select from different inventory items. For instance, in Arc, you have multiple types of berries, you have fiber, other things. So you might randomly generate different numbers of each, and therefore you just keep track of the total number of elements it has. But to keep this simple, we're just going to track the total number of berries. So we're going to start by having a max number of berries. So a plant can't hold any more than these. And this will be an integer. We'll compile that. And we'll say our max number of berries is 10. And we're going to add another variable. And this is going to tell us the number of berries remaining. Oops. Of course, if I can type, that's another integer. We'll compile that. That'll start at 0. And then, of course, we're going to want the inventory type. And in our generic example, they're all going to be a berry type, so we're just going to call it berry type. But you could say inventory items and have an array of different inventory items that it might hold generated at the start. So we're just going to say berry type. But we don't actually have anything defined yet for a berry type. So we don't really have anything to put here. We could put a name, but that wouldn't mean a whole lot. So let's go create the type of berry that we're going to give to people in their inventory. Okay, so let's create a struct. And you can do this in different ways depending upon how your system's going to work. One thing you can do is you can actually create your inventory items as individual actors if you want them to be able to show them on screen, drop them, and so on. It becomes a bit of a headache for doing that just in this demo because of having to do transforms when you spawn the actors and so on. So we're just going to use structs. And we'll go to our blueprints here, and we'll pick out a structure. We're going to call this an inventory item. And we're not going to cover all the things you would do in an inventory. This is going to be a very generic one-item inventory. So we'll double-click on this. Now we're just going to give it some very basic things, which we won't actually really be using in this demo, but just to show you how you might flesh stuff out. So we'd have an item name, which is a type of name, and our default would be basic berry. And let's see, we would, in Arc, if you eat a berry, you get a certain amount of health restored, so let's look at that. You would say health restored, and because this is a very basic berry, we will say that it just restores 1 point of health. In Arc, you would have spoilage of berries, so you could always have a new one, which is time until spoiled. And that could also be a float. And we'd say maybe 5 minutes. And then what you might do is on your tick, keep track for every minute or something. You go through and you update all the items that have spoilage in the inventory and just decrement the time until spoiled in each structure appropriately. Again, we're not going to do all that right now, but just for the future. At some point, I might make a more elaborate inventory example for how this might work, but I didn't want to do all that in one big video, and I didn't want to make a huge series at the moment. I just wanted to cover individual concepts. And one other thing you might do is risk of nausea. So if they eat this berry, will they get sick? And we'll make that a float as well to express a percentage. And we'll say 0.15, so there's a 15% chance that if someone eats this berry, they will get sick. But again, we're not really using any of this. It's just there because we want to flesh out an item a little bit for the demonstration. So we save that and we close it. And now we can go back to our berry type here. And our berry type will be a type of inventory item. And so there we go. We compile, we've got it there. Now, you could say, why not make an array of inventory types at the moment? And you could do that. I think it's a lot of overhead. You can generate what you need at runtime instead of having to store it all in. But if you want to store it all in, you could. And just, hand over items and remove them from your array of inventory items in the plant as you go. I think it's easier just to generate them at runtime, and that way you don't have all the memory overhead of storing all that extra data for however many number of plants you have on your island. Excuse me. So, if we go back to our harvestable plant and our nodes here, let's get rid of a couple of these here because we're not doing anything on tick and so on. But at the start of play, we do want to generate our initial number of berries. And so as we said, we have a max number of berries and a berries remaining. And at the start, we'll set our berries remaining to what the max number of berries is, except that berries remaining will be a random number between 1 and max berries. So you'll see how that works here in a moment. So let's drag up max berries. So we get that. And then we're going to get a random integer in range. We actually need to move this down to max. And so 1. So the number of berries that it will generate will be either 1 or somewhere between 1 and the maximum number of berries, which at the very first time it's generated would be 10. And of course, once we do that, we need to set our berries remaining, because that's the counter for it, as it were. So we'll connect that. And then let's go ahead and update our text render component. So we're going to build a string. And our string is just going to say remaining berries. And then I'll give the count. And so we'll drag in our text render component. And we're going to do a set text. So we can drag that over to that. Make it nice and neat here. We'll connect this to that, and of course it has to convert it to a string. So we'll compile, we'll save. If we go out here now and we drag our plant out, and we hit play, you can see it start up and it's got a remaining berries of 2. We escape, we hit play again, remaining berries of 10. So it's randomly choosing like it should be. Let's go ahead and delete that again. Go back into our harvestable plant. And how do we know if it's harvestable or not? Well, we're going to know that if it has berries remaining and if the player character has come in close enough to be able to harvest. So that's going to be a collision type of decision. So if we click on our sphere and we go down, we can click on component, begin overlap. So when we overlap the sphere, that's when we'll know that we're in range to harvest if it has berries remaining. What we're going to do is we're going to get our count of berries remaining. And if that is greater than 0, then it will be harvestable. So let's create a branch here. And we'll connect this up again. And of course, that being true, it will then be harvestable, so we can set our is harvestable to true. And just for the sake of what we're doing now, we'll go ahead and we'll do a print string. Whoops. Do a print string. And the print string, we'll just say harvestable. And so when you walk into it and you're in range, it'll go ahead and it'll say it's harvestable. Now, the opposite of that is to make it non-harvestable. So when you're not overlapping it anymore, when the player character has stepped away, then we are going to go ahead and we are going to change it to non-harvestable. So let's drag out our is harvestable to set it again. And so now it's going to be non-harvestable, but because we want to ensure no one can do any other actions to it, we're also going to ensure that we have our berries set up here. So we are going to go berries remaining is greater than true, or greater than true, greater than 0. We'll branch that out. And if it's true, if it's greater than 0, meaning there are still berries remaining, then we're going to go ahead and say that it is non-harvestable. Just so we know, because we know a destroyed plant isn't harvestable. But when it's still intact, let's just make certain that we know that it is non-harvestable. Okay, we'll save that. We'll drag one out here. Let's increase its size a bit. We'll go ahead and hit play. As we can see, it started off with a remaining berry count of 7. When we get close enough into it, it is now harvestable. Back out, it's non-harvestable. So we're off to a good start there. So let's delete this. We go back into our plant again. And so all of our basic do we know if we're harvestable or not has been set up. But we actually need to be able to harvest. So for that, we're going to go ahead and create a function. And we're going to call this function harvest. Pretty straightforward. And harvest is going to walk us through the steps needed to figure out how many berries were taken, give them to the player, and then update our count. So if we do this, first we want to know, is it harvestable? Because if it's not harvestable, we shouldn't be doing anything. So I'll add a branch there. And if it's true, then we're going to have to know how many berries we're going to take. And since that's not something we're going to use outside of this function, let's go ahead and create a local variable called berries taken. And that will be an int. And so we can drag, that out to set it. So if it's true, if it's harvestable, then we're going to take a certain amount of berries. Now how do we figure out how many berries we want to do? Well, we're going to do that randomly as well. So we're going to take our berries remaining. And from that, again, we're going to get a random integer in range. And the berries remaining will be our max, and our minimum will be 1. So we'll get at least 1 berry. And that's the number that will be taken. Let's move this up, this down, because we're going to have to do some manipulation of things here. So once we've taken a certain number of berries, we need to remove that number from the berries remaining. So for that, we're going to go ahead and do a minus and subtract the number of berries taken from the berries we have, at which point we need to set our berries remaining. So again, just to follow through, if we're harvestable, based upon the number of berries remaining, we're going to get a random number of berries, either 1 berry or more than 1 berry, up to the number of berries remaining. We'll store that in berries taken. and then we'll update our berries remaining to reflect the fact that we have taken this many berries out of our count. Now the next thing is we want to give the berries to our player. And just to make that a little simpler to follow, I'm going to create another function for that. And that is going to be called add to player inventory. And what we're going to do is we're going to tell them how many berries that we are giving them. So we're going to need an input on that function, which is the count of berries that are coming in. So we will say berries to add. And that will be an integer. That way we're going to hand in the number of berries that we're going to be giving off. And we're going to need a local counter for this. And you'll see why in just a second here. So let's set this counter. And we're setting the counter equal to the number of berries that we are adding. And the reason why we're setting this counter is we're going to have to get a reference to our player character, get a reference to that player character's inventory, and then for each berry item or inventory item we're giving to them, we have to circle through and add it to their inventory. So let's get a reference to our player character. Okay, and let's cast it. In this case, because I'm using the first-person character that came with the arms, I'm casting it to first-person character Iron Belly. So we'll do that. And then here's where we're going to set up our loop. So we will have a while loop. And the condition for this is going to be while our counter is greater than 0. So we need to get our counter again. And counter is greater than 0. So there are still berries left to be added into the inventory. So while that's happening, we need to do something. And what we're going to do is we are going to add it. So we are going to add it to an array. And of course, we have to get the array. So let's do that. For our first-person character here, we're going to go up. And for the sake of it, we will add a reroute node, keep things clean, or at least a little cleaner. And then we're going to get our inventory. But we haven't actually added an inventory yet, have we? So we need to go do that quick. I'll compile this, and it's going to give an error. That's not plugged in. But let's go to our player character. So here's that first-person character Iron Belly. Here's, of course, would be something different. And what we're going to do is under the variables here, we are going to add inventory items. If I can spell. And inventory items is going to be accessible, so we can change it from the plant. And it is going to be a collection of, you guessed it, inventory items. That's going to be an array. So we can compile that and save that. Again, that's pretty straightforward. We go back to our plant now. We have our inventory items. So we can get a reference to it. And using that reference, we will tie that in so our add now knows what the reference is. And we need to make an inventory item because we're using a struct. We can't just spawn an inventory item of something that's existing. We have to actually create a new one. And so if you were using structs in your program to do this, you had multiple types of berries or fiber or whatever else. You might set up a random routine here that went through and generated items from functions. So you might have function make berry X, make berry Y, make fiber. And that's where you're calling when you're adding something in. But we're just being very simple here. So we're just going to make an inventory item. We're going to leave all of our settings as they are because, again, they're just for show at the moment anyway. And that's what we are adding. We compile, that error goes away. Of course, the last thing we need to do in this loop is we need to decrement our counter. So we need to take 1 away from our counter, which is this decrement int. Okay, now we still have a little more to do because we haven't completed our loop yet. And so to complete our loop, we are going to want to look at the total number of berries. Now, if you had a real inventory system on your character, you'd probably have a count system for each item built into the inventory system already. We don't, and so I can actually just get the count of inventory items from here. I don't have to do anything special for it. So what we're going to do is we're going to get our length. Oops, I'm doing that wrong. Get our length. Come on, you can do it. Array length. And of course, it doesn't know what array I want to use yet, but we are going to use this one again. So I'm going to plug that down there. A little messy, but so be it. And then we are going to build a string. Based upon this int. And we are going to say player now has int number of berries. So fairly straightforward. And then of course we want to print the string. And this is just for us to see what's going on. It's not a big deal here. And so we are all set there. And we'll be able to test this shortly. Let's go back now to our harvest function. Now that we've got that in there. And we can say add inventory items, or what I call it, add berries, add to player inventory, there we go. Add to player inventory. And we need to know the berries taken again, so that's our local variable. And we'll plug that in there. And then we'll go ahead and update our text render above the plant so we know how many are remaining. So we will need our berries remaining. And from that we're going to build a string. And this is going to be berries remaining. With the int, we're going to go ahead and set text. Of course, we have to tell it what our text render is. So I'll pull that down. Now we can plug our string into that. And now here comes the thing, which is if we have used all of our berries, then we need to destroy the plant. So let's grab our berries remaining again. I'm going to say if it's equal to 0. Whoops. I got to stop doing that. If it's equal to 0. There we go. Equal to 0. Meaning we are out of berries. Then we are going to want to destroy the destructible mesh, have it fall apart. So let's grab our destructible from here. And the way we do that is we're going to apply damage. Now we left the amount of damage it takes to break it apart at 1, so that's all we're going to have to do. We'll plug that in there. Our damage amount we will change to 1. And it still wants locations for whatever reason, so we will get the world location. It doesn't really matter, other than it forces you to do it. So we'll plug this into both. We'll pull that over, and once it is broken, of course, then it's going to be non-harvestable. So we want to make certain that's set to non-harvestable. We're going to go ahead and turn off our text render. So grab that text render again and pull it down here. And then last thing we're going to do is we are going to set a timer so that our plant goes away. We're going to set our timer by function name, so we're going to have to create a new function, and we're going to call this destroy self. And we'll have that happen 3 seconds after the plant is fallen apart. We better grab a reference to ourselves here. We need to know what object we are destroying. Okay, so we can compile all that. So we're almost there. We're almost ready to go. We need to create the function to destroy ourselves. It's very, very straightforward. So we are going to add that function, destroy self. And if you can guess what that's going to do, it's just going to destroy our actor. Come on. There we go. Destroy actor. And that's it. That's all the function does. So let's walk through this again one more time. So when the harvest action is initiated, and we don't have anything to initiate that yet, but I want you to realize all this stuff is happening within the plant. The player isn't doing all these actions. All the player is doing is initiating a harvest. So the player will end up calling this harvest function. It checks to see if this plant is truly harvestable, meaning are we close enough to it and does it still have berries remaining? If it does, we take a random amount of berries based upon how many berries it has left. We update the number of berries remaining by subtracting the berries we took. We then go through and we add to our player inventory by creating a new inventory item for that berry and then adding it to the inventory items array that the character has. We'll update the character. And then we're going to set our text render to show how many berries are left. If our berry count has hit 0, then we are going to go ahead and apply damage to make the plant fall apart. We're going to set it to not be harvestable if that's the case. We're going to toggle the text render off, and then we are going to destroy it after 3 seconds. So it just vanishes from the screen. So the last thing we have to do is we have to tell our character to actually do something. Because right now, all he's doing is making a motion. So if we go to our character, the way I'm triggering this is with the right mouse button. So after we play our montage of us doing the action, we then need to see if there's anything in place for us to harvest. So we're going to get our capsule component. And we are going to see if we're overlapping anything. So get our overlapping, we actually want overlapping actors. And we're going to see if we're overlapping any harvestable plants. So we're looking for that class. I can actually move this over a little bit. Now we're going to go through a for each loop, so that if there's anything returned, we can process them all. And our loop is fairly straightforward. We're going to take our array element, so the inventory item that's removed, or not the inventory item, the overlapping item that's been brought to us, since it should be a harvestable plant, we are going to cast it to a harvestable plant. Because again, due to our class filter, that's all that should be being returned to us as if it's a harvestable plant. So we'll grab that. And then after it's cast, we are going to see if it is harvestable. And the way we're going to do that is we are going to get its harvestable variable. Now, since we're already checking to see if it's harvestable or not, we wouldn't really have to do this, but I want to be able to set up an action so that we can show that our character knows that we're harvesting. So if it's true, if the plant is harvestable, then we will go ahead and print a string. And we'll say harvesting plant. Dot, dot, dot. And then we can actually call the harvest function on the plant. Now again, we could actually remove this branch and just call the harvest where the branch is directly, because the harvest won't let them do anything if it's not a harvestable plant anyway. But I want us to be able to have this notice. So now that we've got everything in place, let's see if I screwed anything up. So let's drag out a couple of plants, or actually a few plants. And so we'll make that one nice and big. And then let's back up a little bit. And let's add a couple more. So we'll go over here. Whoops. Now we'll make him kind of large. And because I want to show how you can do more than one plant overlapping, we'll do that. And so I'll have that plant as well. And we'll save all this. Let's go ahead and play. So first off, we can see we have 9 berries on that. We have 4 berries on one of these. And if you can see the other one here, it's got 1 berry. So let's start with the plant that just has 1. We get close. We're harvestable, non-harvestable. When we're harvestable, we right-click. And did anything happen? I forgot how many berries we started with. Okay, so player now has 9 berries. We took all the berries. Remember what they had to start with. Let's find out. So, you know what? We'll just have to start over. Okay, so we have 3 berries. We're getting close enough to harvest. Yep. Click the first time, it gets 1 berry. There are 2 remaining. Second time, we get 1 more berry, so the player has 2 berries, 1 remaining. Third time, plant falls apart. Vanishes after 3 seconds. Now we got 1 berry over here and 2 in the back. So if we get in close enough, you can see that we have 2 harvestables. So we know that this first plant should blow up right away, and maybe the second one, right? Yep. Now we got all the berries. So both plants broke down and went away. Now if we want to see that one more time, let's see how many berries we have over here this time. 10 and 5. So even when we're close, let's start over here this time. So even if we're close, when we're over 5 berries, we'll take all those away. Whoops. We got all 10 the first time and 2 from the other one. That didn't quite work how I wanted. But you can see that that plant went away. This plant is still remaining. 2, 1. So now we've claimed all the berries from those 2 plants. And we grabbed all 9 from that the first time out. And just because I like testing to make certain that all the randomness is still doing what it's supposed to do. Let's come over here again. I'm not close enough. Okay, so we grab 5. We have 1. Okay, so 5 and 6. So when we're all done, we should have 16 berries, 17 berries. We're just going to grab this first plant first. So 11, yep. 3, 2, 1, 17. So there you go. That's how it works. That's how simple it is. And I guess that's all I have to tell you. So go ahead, experiment, put this out there, see what you like to do. let me know what you think, and we'll see what comes up for the next concept. If you like this tutorial, please click the like button. If you aren't already a subscriber, please consider subscribing and sharing this with your game development friends. You can find more information about mindless pursuits at the links below. And as always, I want to thank you for all of your interest and support. Take care.